The very first step in importing data is to move data from the source system into the staging table. Let's look at the different configuration options that are available within the data import-export framework when moving data from source to staging. Let's again start with going to the data import-export framework module. And click on processing group. And we're going to click on the vendors processing group that we created and click on entities. Here, you can configure how the data moves from source to staging. And to do that, you click on the modify source mapping. As you can see here, the UI shows you how the source file maps to the staging table. In our case, the source file is pretty similar to the staging table in terms of the names of the columns that have been used. For instance, the source file has a column called account number, and the staging table also has a column called account num. And because these two are the same name, the framework has automatically mapped the two fields. You may, in some cases, need to modify this mapping, and you can do that by just dragging the source file field into the staging field. So let's delete the existing mapping for account num and then recreate it. So I'm going to click on the line that maps account num, right click on it and select delete selected node. And now I do not have a mapping between account num in the source to anything in staging. If I want to now create a mapping, I can just drag from account num in source into staging, and it creates a mapping between the two fields. You can also view the details of the mapping by clicking on the mapping details form, and this gives you a different view of the same mapping data. You have the source fields, which tell you the fields that are in the source file, and the staging field, which tells you what the source field maps to. In this case, you can see account num in source maps to account num in staging. In addition to just the mapping information, the mapping details UI also lets you configure a number of different things. For instance, you can choose to have data that comes from a number sequence be actually generated using the AX number sequences instead of coming from the file. For instance, account num is one such field which you could choose to have auto-generated instead of using the data from the source file. And to do this, select the auto-generated checkbox. And now you can see that the source field is set to auto, and the staging field is account num. Then, in this situation, when the data import-export framework runs and imports the file into staging, for the account num field, it's going to use the number sequences that have been defined in AX to populate the data. When you've specified the auto-generated property, you can also specify query criteria to define the criteria used to define the numbers. We're not going to do this, so I'm going to close the form. The other thing you can do is you can specify that a particular column needs to be defaulted to a specific value. You can do this by selecting the auto default checkbox, and as soon as you do that, the source field changes from being mapped to a field called default, and then you can click on the default value button, and here you can specify the staging value that should be used. If I specify a value here, Then during import, all of the records which get imported will have the same default value that I've specified here. In some cases, you may also need a particular field to be converted from between what's in this file to what it should be in staging. So let's pick, for example, currency. It is possible that in the file, currency is specified as US dollar, euro, and so on in full form. But within AX, it needs to be stored as USD, EUR, or the 3-letter ISO code. To do that, what you can do is you can select the field that needs to be converted and click on the conversion button. And here you can specify the source value and the corresponding staging value. What this would do is it would look at the source value, and if the source value matches any of the values that are in this list, when it imports that data into the staging table, it's going to replace the value with what you specify for the staging value. For instance, if the source value is US dollar, you might choose to set the staging value to be USD. And similarly, you could add additional rows for each of the conversions that you want to do. Finally, if a particular column needs to be treated as being enclosed in a text qualifier, check the text qualifier checkbox on this particular form. As you've seen, the Data Import-Export framework provides a number of advanced configuration options when moving data from source to staging. Let's now look at the process of moving data from staging to target in more detail.